evening, everyone. I'm just going to speak so everyone gets quiet and gets to their seats. Dear attendees, welcome to this event of Radboud Reflects and the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Office. It's nice to see so many people here tonight, although it makes me freaking nervous. My name is Lima Sala. I'm serious, I'm actually very nervous. Be nice. My name is Lima Sala. I'm a historian and DEI expert myself. I'm currently working as a PhD candidate at the Political Science Department here at Radboud and at the Netherlands Defense Academy, where I conduct research on inclusive leadership and organizational cultures. I will be your host this evening and will moderate the conversations. We are here tonight to talk about the power of privilege. Straight, white, male, wealthy, highly educated parents or parent, a university degree, and of Dutch descent. If you check all these boxes, you are likely to be far better off in the Netherlands. How do these advantages come about? And to what extent are opportunities and power that flow from these privileges problematic? Tonight, we will be addressing these and more questions with our speaker and with all of you. Let me introduce our speakers. We will start the evening with a short introduction by Rona Jwala van Oudenhoven, the Chief Diversity Officer here at Radboud University. Rona has Indian roots. She grew up in Trinidad and Tobago and worked in Canada. Recently, her office introduced the DEI strategy roadmap in order to jointly promote a safe, inclusive, and equitable campus society. She's here tonight to say a few words. Then we have our main speaker. Joris Luyendijk is an anthropologist and journalist. He worked as correspondent in the Middle East for NRC and investigated the inner workings of financial world in the city of London. In February of this year, his latest book, De Zeven Vinkjes, has been published, in which he explores his own privileges. He investigates how his own strong socioeconomic and cultural position has given him a head start in life. He reflects upon how his privileges have shaped his self-perception as well as his views of society, and calls into question the desirability of men like him running society. So we will start with Rona, followed up by... I need a few minutes, sorry. I wanted to explain the format before I take my seat. We will start with Rona, followed up by a presentation by Joris. Then I have the privilege and the challenging task to interview Joris, and that will be followed up by a Q&A with all of you. Before we start, some of you know, I always start events by giving out a content warning. We are here to discuss systems of oppression, power, privilege, and intersectionality. These are heavy topics related to experiences of pain and vulnerability for some of us. Please be aware of this throughout the evening, and please be considerate when asking your questions and making your remarks during the Q&A. You don't know the lived experiences of the person sitting next to you. And most importantly, no racist, sexist, homophobic, you get a point, remarks or questions will be tolerated. You will be asked to leave the place. And as I say this, I am aware that it is not always possible to create an entirely safe space for everyone, but I will try to do my best to enhance a safe space as much as possible. And the same goes for us. I know I'm standing here in the position of a moderator, so somewhat a position of power, but these topics affect me too, in a personal way. So I'm not only nervous standing in front of everyone, I'm also nervous about the topics we're going to discuss. And same goes for Joris. So just to make it clear that we're talking, that all of us are in this together. Let's try to make this an evening of learning, critical engagement, and mostly finding one another in our stories. Rona, the floor is yours. Yes, I'm sure.
Thank you, Lima. I really like that you set a nice tone for a safe space. Just to also add that a safe space also means assenting as well as dissenting views. So we are very open to having your opposing views. What we're talking about is the manner in which we do it, and it's all about humble inquiry and respectful listening. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Thank you, Radboud Reflex, for collaborating with the DI office on this initiative. Thank you, Lima, for facilitating. And don't be nervous. I always see you and you rock. You do a great job. Joris, thank you for being here and for being vulnerable. In fact, I think that is what connected us on LinkedIn. Thank you, Radboud University, for looking at power and privilege at the systemic level and being brave enough to confront the institutional work that needs to be done. For herein lies the catalyst for change. And thank you, the audience, for you are the ultimate change agents. Why did we invite Joris to speak about power and privilege? Do we not have enough non-white, non-male, non-privileged persons who are as qualified to do this and do it well? Why is it that we are talking about solidarity and anti-racism and Islamic and Rosary Week next week, yet once again we're centering privilege, whiteness in this narrative that is often the walk of non-privileged and the powerless amongst us? The answer is simple. We cannot do this work alone. We need allies. The work of dismantling power and privilege cannot be the work of the underdog. This work has to be macro as well as micro, structural as well as cultural. It has to be about change in mindsets as well as change in policies and practice. It involves conversations and it involves actions, and it requires all of us. Now, I'm going to challenge you a bit. Next week, in our Solidarity Week, we may very well find it difficult to fill the chairs when we open our session with a keynote by Arun Verma on intersectionality and anti-racism, an event that examines how to disrupt the higher education sector through ambitious actions and collective, informed responses to racism. Many will think that this session is not about me because I am neither racialized nor a member of the LGBTQI community. I do not have an immigrant background, and I may not be a first generation. In fact, I may be a seventh vintage person. Then I say to you, all the more reason to come. Similarly, who will form the audience for our Rose Week events, or sustainability sessions, or Islamic lectures? Is it not time we stopped preaching to the converted? I invite each of you here today to sign up for one event that is about a topic that you do not relate to or identify with, just to simply learn about another narrative or discourse. Joris notes that power in the Netherlands lies with the so-called 7 ticks, a group of men of the same skin color, sexual identity, culture, social class, and education. He discusses how men like him boss. We don't know what it's like to be discriminated against, to adapt to another culture or another social class. Because of our training, we can also get the idea that we are the smartest in the class. All of that together is very personality deforming. He notes that you can be aware of discrimination, but not be able to draw on your own experience. He refers to Gloria Becker when he says, you come across this kind of innocence on many levels. Gloria Becker applies it to skin color and gender, but you can also find it in social class and cultural adjustment. He says, just like everyone else, boys like me are told, follow your heart, be yourself, do your best, and you'll be fine. All other people discover that this is not true, but we do not, Joris says. With us, it beats for the rest of our lives. Mind you, we recognize that there is naturally a lot of criticism from many who do not agree with this, and Lima and Joris will explore the support and the opposition to this body of work, from both the extreme left, the extreme right, and the middle. Those who say, what nonsense, I'm a white male, but this is not me. Or what nonsense, who are you to speak about this? Or what nonsense, I am not racist or classist. There's that element of intersectionality that sociologist Kimberly Crenshaw made famous when she talks about being black and female in the United States. And this we will discuss more on Monday, when we recognize the further distancing and marginalization that occurs when there is an overlap of some of these identifiers. Having lived and worked in Canada and in North America, we have taken a bold step even further, inviting allyship of person like Robin DiAngelo into the space to talk about white fragility. In a nutshell, she says, especially in the US, you cannot have grown up in the waters of racism and classism and inequality and somehow not have internalized even a tiny bit of prejudice. So we should be aware that when we react defensively, she says we are displaying what she calls white fragility. And this is what we need to confront in ourselves, that instinctual defensiveness. So for those of us who say we do not have a drop of prejudice or are not in the least bit racist, ageist, sexist, I boldly say to you, maybe we should do a second take. Chances are that we are all, including myself, a bit ageist, sexist, classist, racist, homophobic, ableist, and much more. Are we all then bad people? Or is it that we just need to recognize that we grew up swimming in some pretty murky waters, and it's about time we remove those goggles or the blinders? It is about time we confront, as the great Michael Jackson sang, the man in the mirror, recognizing also that for colonized groups in oppressive societies, that image is shaped by a double consciousness. Here I reference Du Bois and Frantz Fanon. Is this what Joris is asking of his fellow 7 ticks friends? Or even 5 or 6 ticks, to be strong allies? Polarization is easy. Building bridges takes work. So let's work together. I now welcome you to an afternoon of conversation with Joris Luyendijk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rona and Lema. Thank you very much, Radboud University, and thank you all of you for showing up. I think this is the first sort of public event about my book. It's been 3 months now. And so nobody thought to organize any kind of event like this so far. So I'm really pleased and very happy. And you're moving your hands.
Can you speak a bit more slowly?
Ah, yeah. This is one of my many handicaps. But otherwise, it's so boring for the rest of them. No, that's my regular joke. Yeah, I'll try to speak more slowly. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think as Ona said, the book is not about equality of opportunity. I mean, it touches on equality of opportunity, but what I've tried to do in the book is to respond to the call on the part of many, to men like me, to engage in self-reflection. And the book is a reflection of the self-reflection. And I think you said humble inquiry. What I've tried to do is a humble self-inquiry. And not to engage in performative modesty. And I go like, oh, look at me, I feel guilty in exactly the right way, and I use exactly the correct terms, and I am so superior to the other white men, who are angry white men, who vote populist. Nor to engage in the sort of cancel culture, woke, threatened species. That would have been much easier. It may even have spared me some of the criticism, because now the criticism came from the far right to the radical left and everything in between. Probably if I had written one of these two, I would have at least gotten some support in the media. This time I was like Siewert van Liende. It was. What I've tried to do in the book is to investigate as well as I could, aware of the many blinders that I must still be wearing, how my personality was formed and deformed by the fact that I cannot possibly experience vulnerability when it comes to the social class that I grew up in, the culture I grew up in, my sexual orientation, my gender identity, and my ethnicity. Then, having gymnasium as well as university, that I'm neither able to experience the kind of contempt very often meted out to people who did not go to university or to polytechnic and hogeschool. They've done this really interesting cross-country comparative investigation. I think it's referenced in Sandel's book on meritocracy, where they asked the highly educated what they think of people of the so-called minorities, who together comprise about 80% of the population. And social, the sort of virtue signaling has landed well and truly. So all the correct answers come out when people are asked about the position of women and people of color and LGBTQ, and then they're asked about what they think of the so-called lowly educated, the word alone. And that's like opening a spigot of shit. And there is this kind of free-ranging contempt on the part of so many highly educated when it comes to the so-called lowly educated. And the researchers conclude that, sadly, when they set out to do the research, they had hoped that higher education solves or prevents or heals or prejudice and bias. But their conclusion is, no, it merely shifts it towards the lowly educated. And so I thought I'd add that too, because I can't experience any of that contempt, nor can it be directed to me, nor can it be directed to my parents, because my mother was a teacher of Dutch in a secondary school, and my father was a psychologist for the Rijkspsychologische dienst, so for the government. Now, to bring these, of course, there would be more. I can add more traits. I can add religion. I can add neurodiversity. I can add health with all its ramifications. But the key investigation of the book is what happens to you when, on these traits, you always find yourself on the easy side, on the beneficial side, or on the strong side. So, what I began to realize as I researched the book was that when I deal with difference, I always deal with difference from a position of superiority or a position of power. So I'm actually the least capable of understanding vulnerability because I can't draw on my own experiences. Now you could ask, so why talk about this group? And indeed, when I worked out how many men like me there are in a country like the Netherlands, it's less than 3%. But then I went on to research, which took me forever, to look at all the biographies of our prime ministers, our ministers, those in public administration, openbaar bestuur, as well as in university and the corporate world. And 5 out of the last 6 prime ministers were men like me, unable to draw on their own experiences to understand what discrimination or code switching is. 8 out of the last 10 ministers of justice are men like me. And the landsadvocaat, I would not know what a landsadvocaat is in English. Anyone? The Raad van State. Sorry?
State attorney.
State attorney. Is that a... No, I don't... Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, state attorney. I mean, it's... Yeah, state attorney. And then the Raad van State. Tell me, what is the Raad van State in English? Now I win, huh? This is very seven-tick behavior, by the way, for which I apologize sincerely. Raad van State. I think, I'm not sure other countries have a Raad van State, but that it's the chief advisory organ for legal affairs. And it's run by a man like me, and his predecessor was also a man like me. And the dean, the deken van advocaten, is that the dean? The chairman, or the sort of the head lawyer, head honcho. He is a 7-tick, and his predecessor is also 7-tick. So especially the legal field is just entirely dominated by men who do not and cannot know what discrimination feels like, which makes you wonder why fighting discrimination has not been a top priority in our country. Now, the last 3 editors of the Volkskrant, I could spend another 10 minutes listing people, 7-ticks. It also includes Rutger Bregman, who wrote Humankind, or Meeste mensen deugen gewoon. And I'm not at all surprised that he would come up with a book that says all people are basically fine. Because in their interaction with him, they are basically fine. Because they can't discriminate him on his body, nor on his background. And then he also has the most prestigious education. And indeed, this is borne out by the Central Bureau of Statistics, CBS, who ran the numbers. 2 7-ticks actually did this for me, who worked there. Ruben van Galen and Piet-Hein Mulligen. And the CBS has been asking the Dutch population for many years now, do you trust your fellow citizen? And they plotted this on the 5 traits of body and background. So, the gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, class, your parents' culture. And it's a straight statistic correlation. The more traits or ticks you share with me, the more trust you have in other people. And so it's entirely predictable that a book like Humankind or De meeste mensen deugen would be written by Rutger Bregman. This is how we experience the world. This is also why men like me have so much difficulty dealing with indignation. We call it anger. And because there's nothing we are angry about. And so I'm often, when I've given a lot of talks as part of the research in order to work out how a man like me impacts an audience as compared to people with other traits. And I would often be introduced by a 7-tick man who would be running the organization, because that's what 7-tick men do in the Netherlands right now. And then often they would say, well, for our organization, for our corporation, or for our ministry and so on, diversity is a really important topic. And it was only over time again to realize that it's all encapsulated in that word topic. We are the one group for whom injustice is a topic. And even for me now, as I stand here, which is to my mind the ultimate privilege, I can decide on the train back to Amsterdam tonight that I've had enough. And I can turn away from the topic, and then it no longer exists for me. It may exist for people I love, but for me personally, since racism isn't interested in me, and sexism isn't interested in me, and all these other things aren't interested in me, I can turn away. Now, so this is why I think it was worth writing a book about, to try and problematize a group that until now seems to have kind of disappeared in the broader term white straight males, who together comprise about 40% of the population, who also include immigrants from Poland, from Germany, from Belgium, from former Yugoslavia. 10% of the Netherlands are white with a migration background, so at least one parent born abroad. White, 10%. That includes, so white straight males includes them, but it also includes all the white straight males who had illiterate parents. 250,000 people in the Netherlands are illiterate. It includes parents who are lowly literate, so who can write their own name, but who would really struggle with a text of any complexity. Who have parents who were lowly educated, and then if you have lowly educated parents, you run the risk of being seriously disadvantaged in our school system. And I will try to speak slower. Yes. There's so much to talk about. Yeah. And so now I've lost my point. So using white straight males as a container concept, I think runs the risk of including men who, thanks to their class background or their cultural background, do have experience with either discrimination, intimidation, or code switching. If you were born and you're in a family and your father was a truck driver, and you go to Nijmegen University, you discover soon enough that if you keep speaking Dutch in the way you spoke Dutch at home, people treat you differently. And that's why the so-called class migrants, almost all of them, decide to try to learn to speak Dutch the way I've spoken Dutch from day one. And so these white straight males do have experience. It's not the same thing. There's always there's overlap, and there's a big difference. But really interesting scientific research shows that white straight males who don't have the 7 ticks are much better able to acknowledge their privilege than 7 ticks. Because for 7 ticks, they're still intact. So we have retained, and Gloria Wekker was mentioned before, which I think is the major insight. If I ran a university, I would start innocence studies, what she calls innocence. And I think innocence or self-deception, I think is such a powerful concept to understand what happens to men like me and why we struggle in this day and age, because we genuinely don't understand. And often when I give talks to more general audiences, you will have a 7 tick standing up and saying, well, I'd like to point out that lots of things are going well. And my question is always, why do you think this is what the audience needs to hear? And why do you think it's you who needs to tell it to the audience? But that's how they see themselves. And I can give you many examples, especially of our politicians. Now, I think the equivalent of innocence is fragility. And that's very clearly class fragility, cultural fragility, white fragility, male fragility. I'm always struck by the sort of soothing subordinate clauses with which many people with different ticks start to make their point, saying, well, not to be complaining, or I'm not a feminist, but, or I don't want to sound zielig, but 7 ticks never ever proceed what they want to say with, well, I don't want to sound complaining. They just make their point. And often they don't even have a question, they have a sort of spontaneous review. And I was like this. Probably in many ways I'm still like this. So I think what I discovered in this process of self-reflection is a kind of innocence and a kind of lack of life experience outside the reserve I was born in. Now what does that do, and that's my final point, what does that do to a country where such an overwhelming part of elite positions are occupied by men with the lack of that life experience? I think because we're so similar that we've come to dominate and monopolize the definition of quality. And indeed, this is what you will hear Rutte, for example, say. When Rutte put together his first cabinet with Maxime Verhagen, 2 7 ticks. His second cabinet with Diederik Samson, again, both 7 ticks. His third cabinet with Alexander Pechtold, Buma, and Gert-Jan Segers, again, 4 7 ticks together. And when he presented his third cabinet, he said, he was asked, again, not a single minister or secretary of color, and again, more male ministers than female ministers. And his response was, yeah, I feel bad too, but we're going for the best of them. We're taking the best. And this was Rutte 3, with Halbe Zijlstra, and with, with Hugo de Jonge, Bruno Bruins, who just tipped over the moment Corona happened, and I'm very sorry for him. But I mean, what were your criteria when you decided that among the 700,000 university-educated women, supposing you want university-educated women, there wasn't a single one better than Hugo de Jong? And so we dominate quality, and for us, quality is the extent to which you are like us, so we understand you. And so for us, it's a real plus if you have gymnasium or VWO. And then it's a real plus if you've studied abroad for 6 months. It's a real plus if you had some extracurricular activities. It's a real plus if you had a second degree. And all of these are middle-class things. If you're middle class, your parents will tell you, sure, you'll learn lots of interesting things at Nijmegen University, but the really important thing is who you get to know. And you get to know them in extracurricular activities. You get to play adult in these, as the kroegcommissaris of the student fraternity. And studying abroad, it's quite amazing how someone I know was studying in Leiden, went to a recruiter for the Zuidas, the financial sector here, and asked, okay, this is my CV, what is still missing if I want to come work at the Zuidas? And the recruiter looks at it, he says, experience abroad, buitenlandervaring. And so this is someone whose both his parents are Turkish. He is bilingual, he speaks perfect Turkish. You can drop him anywhere in Turkey and he will find his way back. But you also drop him in lots of other countries in a similar developmental stage as Turkey and he will also find his way back. None of that counts as buitenlandervaring. 6 months of beer drinking in Grenoble. That is buitenlandervaring. So what you really want is somebody who has similar experiences to you and you don't want to hear about the rest. And so the final point is not only that we prioritize the kind of life experiences that we have and then present them as quality, it's also that we leave out, obscure, ignore the qualities that everyone else has to develop. And so resilience. And the words are better in Dutch. So incasseringsvermogen, aanpassingsvermogen, inlevingsvermogen, veerkracht, vechtlust. These are things you don't need as a 7-tick. Now, you ask a 7-tick, what do you want in a leader? They're not going to name these things. And so I think this is where the attack could be directed, at the definition of quality. And indeed, this is what men like me always say, I'm in favor of diversity. I'm a feminist, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of quality. And what we mean is, as long as people may be in a different body, but they are like us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joris. I was thinking about what you said, that people say it's just a topic. I once asked a diversity officer who was a white woman why she's working in the field, and she said, it's so much fun, it's trending, and it's nice, right? And right there and then, my heart broke, because those are not the reasons why I'm doing the work, so that's very recognizable. Thank you for the presentation, thank you for being here. I have a few topics I want to address. Save your questions for the Q&A, unless you think it's very, very urgent in the moment. Let's start at the beginning. So I read the book, and it starts with your experience in London and the reasons why you started writing the book. And I was wondering, even the reason is quite privileged in itself, right? Who gets the chance to go to London in your position, and you already had a name, you had already made a name for yourself in the Netherlands. So I was wondering, why write this book, and what was the moment in London when you thought, this is something I need to dive into?
Yeah, so the book starts out when I got my dream job at The Guardian. I met Alan Rusbridger at an elite event, which I moderated, and where I got to sit next to him during dinner, and then I charmed him, and I gave him my book, which was translated into English. A 7-tick, a British version of a 7-tick had published it in England. And then I went over, and I just didn't gel. And I was never given the benefit of the doubt. My jokes didn't work. I felt absolutely awful, and after 2 years, I resigned. And I think there wasn't one moment. It was this slowly growing realization that I just lacked the adaptive skills. And I think this is the great paradox, is that the reason of all Dutch people I got the dream job was because of all these privileges. And all these 7 ticks who, in the course of my life, had opened doors for me. Because I chopped my life into bits. And after every bit there was a door, and that door opened. My book was published, or I mustered the courage to go study in Egypt, and so on. And there was always 7 ticks who opened the door for me. But because that door was constantly open for me, I had no experience with code switching or incasseringsvermogen, resilience. I was utterly unable to adapt to British culture, and so I failed. And so a friend of mine who has 2 ticks, he would have made it. Because in the course of his life, he had a very different childhood in Zeeland, and the wind was blowing right in his face. He was white and male, but everything else was absolutely atrocious. He would have succeeded there. But of course, he had dropped out of the race, if you want to call it a race, long before. Mm. So that began to strike me as the ultimate paradox. And I realized that if I want to address men like me, I need to start where they are and then take them through a story with an experience embedded in it, so I can take them along. And so it was also in terms of narrative structure that I realized that the Guardian experience would help me write a book in a way that could draw in people who until now had maintained their innocence by keeping all books about diversity out. Mm. Because of course there were more sort of channels feeding into a growing awareness. I mean, there was BLM, and there was Me Too, and there was LGBTQ movements, and there were so many, the rise of so-called populism, and so on. There were so many currents. But the Guardian experience, I think, helped me encapsulate. In earlier versions, there were long bits about Egypt, where I lived for 4 years. I tried to learn Arabic. But ultimately, I decided, no, I have to pin it all on that Guardian experience.
That was the moment. That experience changed stuff for you.
It was not a moment. I think a moment is what we tell journalists when we want to feed them an easy story. I think changes in your brain happen more on a gradual plane.
And you started seeing it after you felt it, the experience in itself there.
I had lived abroad quite a few times in the US and in Egypt and Lebanon and in Palestine. But this in the UK was the first time I was dependent on people who were culturally very different from me, and who also turned out to be from a different social class. And then I also lacked the network, because I had gone to university, but I had gone to the wrong university. I hadn't gone to Oxford or Cambridge or LSE, so I wasn't one handshake away from people who I could sort of claim on or or approach for how am I doing something wrong. I lacked all that. And then when I came back and I began to complain about this to my friends, they kind of very kindly signaled to me, it's like, you are in a very sort of diluted way talking about my life. And I began to realize the way I felt that The Guardian was a watered down version of what many compatriots of mine experience all through their lives. Mm-hmm. And it was still, as you say, it was highly privileged, also in the sense, it was bungee jumping. I would never crash.
Yeah.
There was the elastic. I could always go back to the Netherlands, where at once I would again become this person that if I defend my interests, nobody says, identity politics. As if I don't have an identity. Mm-hmm. Nobody says, we have a panel, but we should have at least 1 7 tick for that perspective. Because we are perspectiveless. And so that's why the experience in London was still very spoiled. Yeah. But the people for whom I write the book primarily are also very spoiled. And so I was quite fortunate, I think, to have an experience that was still within their stretch zone and wasn't immediately in the panic zone, mm-hmm. because of that massive layers of innocence and fragility.
But then you had that experience. So why do you think? Because you talk about, you write about seeing it, feeling it, and I was wondering, why do you think 7 tickers, for example, in this room, will be convinced by reading your book now?
Well, from the responses I get, is that they are given the book by their partner or by their daughter. Or because they know me, or because they're mentioned in the book, and I send them a copy. And essentially, the responses are all similar. Everyone said, I really didn't feel like reading the book. I also didn't see the necessity, because I've been keeping up with the news. I've seen the protests about BLM, and I'm very much against all the racism, etc. And
Have you already started? I'm sorry, writing the book when BLM happened here?
I was. Well, it's kind of the book devolved, but I was. Okay. I had a version ready. But there was a very bad version, so I knew I had to start all over again. The writing took about 2.5 years, and the whole thinking and researching altogether, I think about 4 years.
Okay.
That's usually how long a big book, I consider this a big book, a big book takes.
Yeah.
So, and then normal people do a PhD in that time, and I do this. And so what the 7 ticks tell me is like I didn't see the necessity. I really felt that I was, I read the Volkskrant, I read all these interviews, especially since BLM, where every week there's a big interview with somebody explaining what it's like to be excluded. And I diligently follow that. I mean, most of my friends are, of course, soft left, so they read these things. And then I struggled at every page. And I began to seek out the differences where you were privileged and I wasn't. And it's cumulative. And then over time, as I speculate, so I'm given this opportunity, but what if I'd been Olga Luyendijk, the name I'd been given as if I was a girl? What if I'd been of color? I certainly would not have become zomergastenpresentator if I had been of color, because there's never been a zomergastenpresenter of color. And so some of these 7 tick friends tell me that they've been lying awake for a couple of hours, sort of going through their own lives and thinking, who opened which door? Who showed me a door? Who told me how to knock the door? Who recognized me as a fellow 7 tick and then showed me the way after the door was opened? And then I asked them, so would you be interested in coming into a podcast that I'm thinking about starting, where 7 ticks sort of talk among each other? It's like, where do we go post-innocence? And they go like, no way. No way, I run a hospital. I cannot afford to plunge my hospital in a Twitter storm.
Mm. Yeah. Because of the work they do not want to participate.
Well, because of the toxic atmosphere at the moment.
Joris, why not do a podcast with black women, black men, LGBT?
I feel I have very little to add there.
But a lot to learn.
Yes, so I listen to them.
Mm. Okay.
That's what I've been doing. I've been interviewing countless people who have really helped me on endless walks, also during Corona, where we just take 1 tick. And we just say, so what is the hardest in your mind to explain to a white person on what it's like to be non-white? And we would just spend hours walking and just explore deeper and deeper and deeper. And so often these talks also open doors for my interlocutor. And one of the persons I learned most from, she has 0 tics, but she's about to graduate. She'll have 1. And so she said there's this moment when you realize that you'll never be white. And she says and she described it as this moment of sinking, when suddenly all these figures that you've identified with, you realize they're white and that you're not. And indeed, I know from kids that they see gender from day 1, but they don't see color. Color is really implanted. And so we'd have these conversations, and then the next day I'd have a similar conversation about sexual orientation, or about with culture. I had some experience going to Egypt and really trying to learn the language and live sort of the life of ordinary Egyptians, of course within all the privileges. And that was immensely helpful. And that's also what I would really recommend 7 tics, but also women with 6 tics. Is that there's so many tics where you've been shut out. Privilege is essentially a handicap because it shuts you out from an experience of your fellow citizens. And so that's really how the book also came about. I also needed these interlocutors to tell me what I'd missed.
Yeah. You just said the responses were similar. Everyone felt uncomfortable on both sides. I need to get to the criticism as well tonight. One of the main points was you're talking about the 7 tics, which essentially is intersectionality, but you do not call it intersectionality, and you explained a bit of it. I was wondering, because you explained that you do not want to use academic language, that's why you didn't use intersectionality, right?
Yeah, except in the verantwoording.
Yes, yeah. I was about to, because you also mentioned code switching and other theories, yeah. Well, first of all, how did you experience it? Because I was talking about, we're sitting here and it's personal, right? It's an extremely personal book. I can imagine the criticism, if you had any regarding your other books, you would take it as a writer, as a professional. But how did this affect you on a personal level as well? Or did it affect you?
Oh yeah, I mean this is not something I recommend to become this kind of hate figure for a weekend for people who cannot have read your book because it's hardly in the stores. So I might as well have published a dummy. And it was immensely personal. It came from all sides because the extreme right hates me anyway because they associate me with the establishment, and the soft right, they don't want to hear any of this. Then the soft lefties, the columnists and so on, they may not have 7 tics, but they have lots of tics. I mean, I tried to find a columnist with 2 tics. Really difficult. Most columnists have 5, 6 or 7 tics, and they decided for the rest of the Netherlands that this was not something we needed to discuss. And then there was the radical left, who also had a number of criticisms. So that was far from pleasant. If you work for so long at a book, and I'm a writer, so I'm not a professional who writes a book. I'm a writer, so that goes down to the level of looking at every word and at the last letter, and then the first letter of the next word to see how the cadence and the rhythm and the pace is, and look at the number of words in a sentence and the size of the words in the sentence, and it to that degree. And I had finished it end of January, and mid-January, and early February it comes out. So I had very little holiday, vacation, and then this thinking. So that was, I mean, it's still all white tears, and it's what I experienced in 2 months is less than what Sylvana Simons deals with in an hour probably. So, but I think you can experience pain and still put it in a context where you realize that it's small beer compared to other pain. But then Marienpol is again worse than Sylvana Simons. We can always find something worse. So that's been, that was tough. Also quite frustrating, because I felt that the chief message of the book, which we need to problematize a subspecies of the white straight male, because if we target white males, we cast our net far too wide. Basically, they hardly came across, and that was very frustrating, and also made me wonder, what's the point of trying to put together an argument if the argument comes across in public opinion in such a twisted way that I often wish that the article had not been written at all. All this stuff about bad publicity is better than no publicity. I would much rather not have had publicity, because basically all of it was uninformed. People hadn't read the book. So that was very frustrating.
And I can imagine the criticism of the far right. Maybe you kind of anticipated that.
Yeah, I welcome that. I really don't want to be their friend.
And then, but do you want to be a friend of the left then? Did they reach out to collaborate more, or because you wrote it to contribute to the discussions, to the debate on diversity and inclusivity? Were there any handouts to collaborate? Did you seek it out yourself?
No. So no and no. So this is the first time I'm in any kind of public event of this kind.
No, I mean really the activists or the people who have like a name in the field. Wekker and Nancy Jouwe.
No. So there were a number of people who did reach out in the sense of, hey, I read the book and I see what you're trying to do, and I see where the criticism, and some of it I agree, but I also think that you're doing this in good faith, which was really important for me. I mean, if once people question your good faith, it's end of story. You can't discuss, because the more you defend yourself, the more the deeper you dig yourself into a hole. But it's what I found difficult to stomach is that people would, for example, say he doesn't even mention Gloria Wekker.
But you do.
Yeah, and so I'm reading this and saying, wow, this is an opinion piece on BNN-VARA-joop.nl. And then somebody else would come and say, well, I haven't read the book either, but I think it's a good thing, even though there's nothing new in the book. It's a good thing that he says these things, because there's still dimwits who don't even know this. That's not the kind of defense I want. Because somebody hasn't read the book. So to say there's nothing new in the book, well, there could be some new stuff in the book. So that those, there were a couple of people came to my defense, but it was quite sparse. That was what also played a role, which had nothing to do with the topic at hand, or the whole issue at hand, was the fact that I've written 2 very critical books on journalism, which were taken very, very, very personally by a number of people in journalism who 15 years ago were insulted and were now in positions of power, and who were just biding their time to get back. And I'd been warned for the past 15 years by friends who do go to their parties. It's like, they really hate you. And so they said, what have you done? You know, what did I miss that you have done? So, no, they really hate you. And so this was their opportunity. There was a Twitter storm over the weekend where I was criticized from all sides, and then they came in and leveled all sorts of entirely unfounded or deeply convoluted accusations that were then very eagerly distributed by others via social media. Alas, it's again, compared to Sigrid Kaag, Femke Halsema, presenters of color, it's nothing. But I think for what I might have contributed, the little stone in the mosaic that I think only a man like me can contribute, because I can tell you what it's like to be so innocent. I think that stone got damaged or immediately discarded, perhaps sooner than would have been helpful.
That's a point I see, because when I was doing my research, I spoke to a lot of diversity officers, gender advisors, who would always complain about the fact that they weren't supported by their male colleagues. They would always say, if I give a training or a workshop and a white male colleague would stand next to me and support my story, I would have more leverage. Thank you, whoever that was in that corner. Thank you. Oh, Kiki, it's a friend. Always. Thank you. Leverage. They were always complaining, like, we don't have the support of the white male colleague. So when you say, like, I want to be one part of the mosaic, I completely get it. I have to say, also while reading it, that point comes across. And you do mention Wekker, but the point that I want to make is you don't mention Crenshaw throughout the book, and especially not intersectionality. And I wanted to ask, you already explained why not, but don't you think it was important to mention her at least once, because you're talking about diversity and inclusivity and the point of erasure and the fact that Black women were ignored in history for so long? In that sense, you could have made a strong point, being one of the first, or you said the first white male writer writing about this. You could have made a strong point supporting that, because in this field, that is a big issue.
I don't think I'm the first white male writer to write about it.
Okay, one of the first,
and there were others. I think I'm the first to try to understand what privilege did to my worldview, my self-image, and so on. Yes, I mean, in retrospect, I could have had such an easier life if I had mentioned her once.
Not so that you have an easier life, to support the cause.
Yeah, so, but you ask, shouldn't you have included it? Well, yes.
Yeah.
In that sense, I think and that's what I try to address in the verantwoording. I'm weighing two factors. Yeah. I'm trying to reach the kind of soft right, soft left, highly educated men like me. So D66, VVD. And they've been primed by our Prime Minister to respond to any kind of jargon as, that's for the wine-sipping elites. That's ridiculous. And our Prime Minister literally says, you know, like, I'm not interested in sociological jargon.
Yeah.
And so he's tried to toxify sociological jargon, and he's proud of it. And I think if you've been working in this field for a long time, it can be difficult to accept just how little of any of this has landed in society at large. Yeah. And I can see how immensely frustrating that is.
It is.
But for the kind of people I'm trying to reach, for them, even the word, I mean, they literally ask me, so tell me again, inclusivity, what is that again? Or what is diversity even, what does it contribute? Wat levert dat nou op? And these are newspaper reading. There are vast swaths, even of the highly educated 4 million in the Netherlands, for whom none of this is live. And so I felt I have to make it the candy as sweet as possible. So when there's a term that is not jargon, such as innocence, and that term does real work for the argument I'm making, indeed it's the argument ultimately that I'm structuring it around, I give her all the dues I can. You know, I think what an apt name, wekker, alarm bell. What an apt name. But when it's a term that I can avoid, then for me, I weighed the accessibility above erasure. So it wasn't like I wasn't aware of erasure, but I felt that in the cause I was trying to further, it would do more damage than benefit. And so we can certainly discuss whether that was the right call. But it's quite different from he's stealing the ideas of black women in order to make a quick buck off the woke cake. And I think I struggle to see how you can devote your life to a society that is inclusive, where everyone feels safe to make their point, and then spread that sort of argument without reading the book. That is difficult for me. But I think it illustrates just how hard it is to deal with perspectives that you feel are repugnant or that you disagree with. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think it's I try to be humble and compassionate.
Thank you. Let's get a bit more into the content. So I was looking at the 7 ticks, right? I have like 3 out of 7. But still, I was thinking, you start... Can I share something about what's in the book? Or, okay. So you start by your childhood story when you were ill. And you're talking about how different your life would have been if you wouldn't been able to walk after the experience. But you can, and life is different and everything. So I was thinking, a lot of the ticks are related to class and education. And we talked about there are more ticks to be mentioned. How would you say that, for example, health, because you start with that saying, this would have made a big difference in the rest of my life. How would you say other ticks like health, religion, or in my case, I'm the child of war refugees, and even the 3 ticks I have are colored. How would you say these 7 ticks, how should we perceive these 7 ticks in context with other possible ticks which could have a major influence on our lives?
Yeah, so I think that 7 ticks is not a theory or a formula. It's more what does call an handvat, a kind of a peg, to talk about experience with vulnerability and to try and switch privilege from something that you should try to want to something that you should acknowledge is effectively a handicap if you want to understand society you're in. So I could have made it 12. Being from a post-Christian culture with the 7 dwarfs and the 7 world wonders, I went for 7. When it comes to health, I mean, I think certainly a region, religion, neurodiversity, there are a number of that one could have included. Health, I think, is really of an entirely different kind. It is impossible to research when you want to take into account biographies of prominent people, because health also includes mental health. It is extraordinarily difficult to find out how people's mental health is, also of those in power, let alone their parents. And so if you want, this is why I've decided to focus on specifically these 7, is also because they are researchable. ABN, speaking the sort of the dialect of the elite, algemeen beschaafd Nederlands, is already really difficult, both to define and to work out whether people had spoken it at home. So the key thing, I think, is not so much which are the 7 ticks, are there other ticks, but hey, there is a category of people in society who, no matter how many ticks we include, always find themselves on the easy side. They are the most likely to achieve positions of power and prestige because they've got everything in their favor, but they're the least likely to then address injustice because they're not exposed to it. That, in a nutshell, is my argument. And so I can see how it's a really interesting and intriguing parlor game. Like, who can think of another tick?
There's so many.
There's so many, but it takes away from this fundamental insight that the people least capable of running a society that honors difference are currently the ones most likely to become the leader. And so I think that calls for direct government intervention, and it also calls for redefining quality. Take that definition power away from us. We no longer should define what is quality. We should say, if we go from a society governed by an invisible norm, where the more you look like and the more you behave like Joris Luyendijk, the more likely you are to do well, to a world of difference, where people can express their differences to the point where it becomes unworkable. If you're gay, you no longer have to pretend to be straight. If you're a female, you no longer have to wear your hair short and so on. If we're going towards a world of difference, we need different leadership qualities. And these leadership qualities are found everywhere except among 7 ticks.
Who are running the country.
Who are running the country. And also the conversation about the country.
And the university. And other organizations.
Well, I think the university, actually quite a few. So Marianne Letchert in Maastricht is also a class migrant.
Yeah. No, yeah, yes.
And so, I mean...
I messed this up, I'm sorry. Let's do this over. Yes.
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 Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, we'll cut that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so well, I think you can see how much work remains to be done and still acknowledge that some work has been done. And that can be useful. So universities, I found fewer than in politics. It's striking also that the less you can measure performance, the more likely you'll find 7 ticks. So you can measure performance in Parliament because there are elections and people campaign for themselves. Parliament is far more diverse than the government. The government works through appointments. The same with the city council across the country are far more diverse than the aldermen who are appointed. And so you look at entertainment, sports, and so on. You can measure performance. The city, where I did research when I was there, if say derivatives board, the derivatives desk, you find everything. It's Benetton, because you can measure people's mathematical skills. You go to sales in asset management, talking to rich people, and it's 7 ticks central. It's much harder to measure performance there. Also in deal teams, where people work together, it becomes harder to measure performance, more 7 ticks and more women with 6 ticks. So this is Kylian Mabou, the great researcher, former whistleblower at ABN AMRO, who says that the glass ceiling is the point where you can no longer measure performance. From then on, it's all about how much you resemble those who still pretend to be measuring performance.
I feel like I need to explain why I sighed.
Probably.
Because we're talking... Can I have a second? We're getting to the Q&A in a few minutes. I sighed because I do get that there are women or, leadership at universities is looking a bit more different. But still, from my perspective, a woman of color doing a PhD, it is still very much white. And those stakes are included, right? Even when the women are in charge. For example, I know we have students and co-workers. How many black professors does Radboud University have?
0.
How many professors of color? You say not many, right? But I'm talking about Dutch professors. I'm not including the international ones. So from my perspective, it's still very much, even like the point you're making about leadership and the government, from my perspective, it's like everywhere. That's why it's at running the country. It's at so many organizations, and it really doesn't matter when one woman is in charge, because we know one person one person running she's still dependent, you know, from so many other factors. So yeah, that's why I sighed. Yeah, I want to say that point. The things you're saying about quality, that really struck me, because a lot of people ask me, do you believe in quota? Should we have quota? And when you're talking about performance and quality, you just mentioned the prime minister and all these other people. It was one of the first times like I felt, oh, see? It's like the argument against quota to enhance more diversity was made so clear by your point. Like, it's not about performance or quality. It's about basically kind of being lucky, right?
Yeah, resemblance to those already there.
And that's why it's so difficult to read, I think.
To read? Yeah,
for the ones who check the 7 ticks. Because you're challenging their talent, their qualities, their...
Yeah. The thing is that those who have most to fear are the talentless 7 ticks. And also the half-talented white straight males with lots of ticks, but perhaps not 7. And the great thing about talentless people is they are rarely aware of their talentlessness. It's most of them think, just like most people think, they are very good drivers, you know, above average drivers. And if you've ever worked under a really dysfunctional boss, the key characteristic was that he didn't realize he was dysfunctional. So those who have most to fear from this don't understand they have much to fear. They think the talentless people are over there. I think from my experience so far, and you know, for what it's worth, I think that people tend to overestimate the degree to which any of the D&I discourse has landed at all among 7 ticks, especially my generation and older. I think that they really overestimate the extent to what that has landed. I think they underestimate the degree to which a lot of 7 ticks are equally tired of the talentless ones that have come in thanks to their ticks. So if you are Robert Dijkgraaf, our education minister, who used to be at Princeton, he's one of our brightest theoretical physicists. He has 6 ticks because he's from humble background. But he'd much rather work with a genius person with different ticks than with some bozo who looks like him, who doesn't even really understand string theory. So I think there may be more reason for optimism of what might happen once the 7 ticks finally wake up. And I can only speak to myself. For myself, I've been appointed always by men and hired by men, but I flourish under women. It's appointed in this version, in the end didn't make it because I was centering myself so much that I in the end cut a lot. But one of the points was that I would not have been where I was now in terms of success without these women, because I can't really work under men. It's probably my fault, but I don't work well under men. So in that sense, for me too, the advantage of having women in positions of power is massive. So I think there could be more support that is still dormant or latent among 7 ticks in power. But as things stand, innocence rules and fragility reigns.
And where do we go from there?
Yes, white men, what shall we do?
But that's the thing, right? Because the title is Zeven vinkjes, hoe mannen zoals ik de baas spelen.
Yeah.
But they don't play, they are in charge. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, and this is really where my expertise stops.
Okay, well then. I was asked to talk about building bridges, the future, where do you go from here, but we end here.
I'm struck by how many times I'm invited into a role that is beyond my expertise. and a woman friend said, yeah, exactly. When I address a problem, I'm asked for proof. Yeah. When you address a problem, you're asked for a solution. Mm-hmm. And so again, here there's also sort of gendered insults then leveled at me, that I'm coward and I'm weak. And women are rarely called cowards and weak. Mm-hmm. So there is that these, it's all again, male tears. It's nothing big. You see these soothing sounds I make, but it's striking how that works. Mm-hmm. How I'm in a double bind. If I don't offer solutions, that's easy. And if I do offer solutions, I'm the white man telling people what to do.